everyone, welcome back. This is the final lecture in motor learning and development class, and we're going to be talking about motor programs today. So here we go. When we watch amazing musicians, for instance, we are in awe of how they don't make mistakes and how they can do so many little movements at once and so quickly. So why is this? What controls those movements of those amazing musicians? It would seem as if those movements are planned ahead of time, and then once they're triggered, they allow the action to run its course without any modification or hardly even any awareness. But if these actions are not controlled by the processes of which you are aware, then how are those movements regulated? Do these movements go through our really slow information processing system? Do these movements go through our closed loop control system where there is feedback and a comparator? So how do they do this? So that's what we're going to talk about in this lecture. On this next slide, let's watch this couple-minute video of the world's fastest banjo player, and I want you to think about how he might make these movements so fast, so perfectly, and so fluidly. It's kind of a funny video, but enjoy it. Check it out. In the last lecture, we discussed the closed loop of motor control, where sensory feedback is continuously compared to the brain's expected movements, and corrections are made and even more movements are executed. But this movement control system is quite slow because it goes through the stages of information processing. It would be too slow to control the movements of the world's fastest banjo player. So in that example, the musician's movements were controlled by a totally different system. And this system is called the open loop control system. This is what this lecture will focus on, the open loop system of motor control. So this concept adds the idea that we have the ability to centrally organize a set of commands in our brain before we even perform the skill, and then all of that information, those organized commands, is sent for one movement, is sent to a single message to our bodies. Once the action is then completed, the open loop system's job is over. I think it's a bit funny that researchers have named this a loop because it doesn't loop back with feedback. And because of the lack of feedback, there really isn't any time to react or change the movement once it's been executed. So this applies mostly to fast ballistic movements. And if all things go as expected, then this open loop control system is really effective. But in the case of unexpected change, this type of control is very inflexible. So unlike the closed loop of control, there's no comparator that looks at the executed movement against what the brain was expected to happen. The book gives an example of this in a machine such as a microwave. You put your food in the microwave and program it to run on high for 1 minute. The desired state is for your food to be at the temperature that you like for eating it. But there is no monitor in the microwave that measures the temperature of the food in order to sense if it's reached the desired state within that 1 minute or not. That monitor would be present in a closed loop system that would modify if the microwave went longer than a minute or shorter than a minute to reach that desired state. But that doesn't exist, and therefore the microwave will execute that pre-planned program of high on 1 minute, whether your food ends up being cooked properly or not. This is the open loop. In humans, some examples would be a golf swing or a tennis serve. Your brain makes a decision on what motor control plan it wants to use, and that pre-planned set of commands are sent to the body, and then the movement occurs until it's finished with no sensory feedback at all. This set of commands that is pre-planned in our executive area, which is our brain, is what is known as a motor program. They are essentially our open loop systems. We use these motor programs during closed tasks that typically are under circumstances where the environment is very stable and very predictable. These types of movements appear to be carried out without much possibility of or even a need for modification. So this image is another example of an open loop task where a motor program is used. Swinging a bat at a ball that is stationary on a tee is a very stable environment where not much modification is needed. So I want you to think about this. What do you think about swinging a bat at a ball that is pitched to you from another person? Would you consider that an open loop, or would it be a closed loop system? Let's say we are standing in the batter's box, about to swing the bat at a ball balanced on the tee. But say this is our first time ever swinging a bat. In this instance, and for the next several instances until we get better at this skill, we will be using a closed loop system of control. We are in the process of building that motor program. It's not there yet in our brains to be called on during this task. Practice is thought of as building new, more stable, more precise, or even longer operating motor programs. We need the feedback, we need the modifications, and we need the instructions in the closed loop control system to develop that motor program and therefore switch to an open loop control system. Then, once we've developed this motor program, we do switch. We switch to a more open loop control of that movement. The movement then becomes more automatic and doesn't need any modification. Now, how does this open loop system fit into our conceptual model of motor control? Basically, if you look where the green shading is, the series of blue boxes, this would be what the open loop system looks like all by itself. Remove the feedback, remove the error correction, but remember, an execution area of the central nervous system is used to execute the motor program, unlike a reflex, which is what is symbolized in the lower portion. So the open loop control system would basically be from input to movement following the flow of all of the blue boxes. If you were to categorize a task into either fast or short, or slow and long duration, this would signify which loop you'll be using. So for fast, short movements, would you use the open or the closed loop? If you guessed open, you're correct. And you would use a closed loop for those slow, long duration, adjustable movements. Let's think back to Chapter 2 when we discussed reaction time and what can increase or decrease our reaction time. Remember that the time it takes to go through the information processing stages is what determines what our reaction time is. If there are more choices in movements, or the movement is more complex, our reaction time will be slower. If the movement is simple, and there is only one choice, then our reaction time is much quicker. Researchers have also found that under certain conditions, such as with a startling stimulus, our reaction time can actually be dramatically shortened. A loud acoustic signal, such as a gunshot or a loud horn, are examples of startle indicators. These researchers asked their subjects to listen for a quiet stimulus, then perform a prepared motor program immediately. The subjects repeated this over and over. The stimulus, then the movement. The stimulus, then the movement. The stimulus, then the movement. Their reaction time was measured each time. Occasionally, though, these researchers changed the stimulus to a super loud, startling type of indicator. They surprised the subjects. And what they found was that the reaction time after that startling indicator was shortened by 100 milliseconds compared to their reaction time on the non-startling indicator. Why this happens, the researchers are unsure. But they believe that there is some way we carry out motor programs that may be more reflexive, meaning skipping the information processing stages. Or they hypothesize that maybe we can actually speed up the information processing stages, but that it takes an indicator that startles us for that to be executed. Another big question within the research of motor programs is if there is this point that we can actually stop the movement once it's started. So in other words, is there a point of no return? And if so, when is it? The existing method of thinking is that a motor program is released and the action is carried out in its entirety unless a second stop signal program is initiated in time to arrest that completion. So basically, we have a go motor program and we have a stop motor program. So that answers this question of can a movement be stopped once it's started? But is there a point of no return when that stop signal is too late? Research has shown that at about 150 to 170 milliseconds after a movement is initiated is this point of no return. So if a stop motor program is initiated before that time, then we can actually stop the movement. But if that stop program was initiated after that 150 to 170 milliseconds, then the movement will still be completed in its entirety. Another finding that supports the idea that we have motor programs pre-planned in our brains is the evidence behind muscle response patterns. So in this case, researchers had their subjects perform an elbow extension movement while pushing a lever forward. The researchers measured muscle activation of that movement and found that the agonist muscle, the tricep in this case, contracted initially starting the movement. Soon after, the antagonist muscle, the bicep, contracted to slow down the extension movement as a balancing force, and then the tricep turned off. Then finally, at the very end of the movement, the triceps contracted again to stabilize the limb at the target area. So basically it went tricep, bicep, tricep for this one elbow extension movement. Next, the researchers unexpectedly turned off the lever on occasions when the subjects pushed it, as to not allow any movement at all. They measured the muscle contractions again. And what they found was that a similar pattern in the muscle contraction, the agonist then the antagonist, happened at about the same times as before, even though no movement occurred. The similar pattern occurred for about 100 to 120 milliseconds until the pattern was disrupted and then changed. The researchers believed that sensory information from no movement caused a stop motor program signal to be sent, and therefore the muscle contraction pattern ceased. So basically, when no movement occurred, it went tricep, bicep, and then it was stopped. What this illustrated is that we have a go motor program and a stop motor program, but there is a time point that this stop motor program must be sent in order for that movement to actually cease. The concept that we have motor programs in our brain that we can choose from when we want to make a movement has another lens that we can look at them through. This lens is called the generalized motor program theory. So this theory states that sometimes a motor program will be exactly the same each time, and sometimes the motor program will have variations. But if you think about it, every time we swing a bat at a ball, there are an infinite number of variations possible to that swing. So, do we have a separate motor program for each of those variations? Or do we have one motor program that is allowed to change up a bit? The generalized motor program theory answers this question. Two components exist within the generalized motor program theory. They are called the invariant features and the surface features of the motor program. The invariant features are the things that remain the same, and the surface features are the things that are allowed to change. For example, a musician may play their song on the guitar the same way each time, executing the invariant features of that movement. The relative timing or the pattern of the notes to the song would be invariant. But a musician could also play that same song faster, or they could play it slower, or they could play it softer or louder. The parameters, or the change in volume or speed, or any other way the song could be played, would be the surface features of that movement. So what this theory is saying is that we have one motor program for playing this song, but certain things can be modified. According to the generalized motor program theory, movements are thought to be produced via our information processing stages. For instance, a stimulus is identified in the first stage, then a response is selected, and then the motor movement programming happens, and then the movement is executed. So for this example, the stimulus that is identified is that I'm going to play a song on the guitar. Then the response is selected, and basically the motor program is retrieved from long-term memory of which song that I have memorized am I actually going to play. Then, according to the generalized motor program theory, this program is then parameterized in that movement programming stage. What this means is that parameters such as speed, direction, volume, or distance are applied to that program based on what is necessary in the environment. So in this example, I'm going to say that I'm going to play this song soft and slow. Then, once the parameters have been selected and assigned to the program, the movement can then be carried out with this particular set of surface features. All right, I'll conclude this lecture with a quick summary of what we discussed. So we talked about the open loop system of motor control and how it's applied to movements that are fast and short in duration, and that they do not involve any feedback or modification. And that's different than the closed loop system of motor control. We also discussed the motor program hypothesis and all of the considerable evidence supporting it: reaction times with startling indicators, inhibiting actions, and muscle response patterns. And then last, we discussed the generalized motor program theory, and that provides us with the possible solution to the question of how many motor programs we can store because of the infinite number of ways we can have variations in our movements. So, I'll leave you with this. What do you think? Does the batter that is going to swing at a pitch using their open loop control, or do they use their closed loop of control? All right, that's a wrap, folks. Thanks for joining me in all of these lectures.